Hello, and welcome to the Lighten Up Podcast with Lauren Polly, your invitation for living on the lighter side of life. I'm Lauren Polly, and I am delighted you have chosen to join me today for episode 246 of the Lighten Up Podcast, but also, more importantly, episode number 3 in the Resiliency Roadmap for Entrepreneurs. This is all about well-being and how to take care of yourself on the entrepreneurial journey, because it is full of ups and downs and twists and turns. So this goes with my brand new ebook of the same title, Resiliency Roadmap. It is a free download. The link to do that is down below in the show notes. So go ahead and grab your copy if you want to dive in deeper and take part in some of the reflective exercises that I've included in it. We kind of built this series. Number one was really talking about what resiliency is and the importance of building a strong foundation. Our episode number 2 that we just finished up a couple of days ago, that was all about mental health, well-being, and creative pursuits, about the journey and not a destination. And so many of us have that backwards, where we think that to succeed, we're going to get to a certain point. And because we have that, we have very fixed tools that we use in order to do so. So that episode really went a lot into reframing it as a navigational journey and different tools to use in the moment as you navigate along the way. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and do that after this episode. Today, we are talking all about energy dynamics. This is such an important conversation. Last week was really about looking at yourself and how you feel and how to take care of you. This week, we're really diving into what happens when we start to interact with other people. And oh my goodness, is that always interesting. But those of us who are entrepreneurs, unless you are in a space where maybe you're creating a writing piece or an art piece, those people are still going to have to interact a little bit, but unless you're in that kind of business, you're having to interact with people a whole bunch. If you are a service-based provider, if you have a brick and mortar store, if you are creating a piece of art, eventually you're going to have to deal with marketing and buyers and sellers and all that kind of stuff. So no matter what, this conversation is super relevant, because if you're dealing with people, having a fundamental understanding of energy dynamics and how you can build resiliency for yourself when they do not go well is super important. I am a communication lover. Those of you who have been following me for a while know that I'm a medical speech language pathologist. So I've been working in the hospital system for like 20 years with communication breakdowns. People who've had strokes or brain injuries, people who just aren't able to really express themselves as clearly as they would like to. And for me, it's never really been about trying to perfect their communication. It's way more been about how to get them to connect to people. Because in my mind, energy dynamics, communication, all of this really comes down to being able to connect with yourself. And then from there, making an extension to somebody else. So there's a unique connection. And in business, it is the same thing. People buy from people they know, they like, they trust. You know, when you're listening to somebody, even on a podcast, I've had this feedback from people of like, gosh, I feel like you're just talking straight to me, like we're just hanging out at a coffee place. And I love that, because really and truly, that's a sense of connection. And there's so many different types of connection, but that personal kind of I'm here with you connection is one that I love to cultivate with people. You may have your own unique brand of that. I'm sure you do. It might be a beautiful exercise to really dig into how you want people to feel when they're in your space. And it's different for all of us. So energy dynamics may sound woo-woo to some of you. It's not. It's one of the most practical things you can dive into. If you can just right now as an exercise, think back to the last person that you met. And just pull them up in your head, pull up the interaction. Think about how you felt in that moment. Did you feel open? Did you feel cozy? Did you feel kind of interested where you wanted to lean into the conversation? Did you feel the opposite where you were kind of like, oh, this is not someone I want to be talking to? Or did you feel like shy all of a sudden or closed off? Did your body start to close to them? Or was it something where it was more of a nebulous conversation where it was just, that's fine, no biggie? All of those are awarenesses of the energy dynamic. And what so many of us do is we tend to over personalize and take too much responsibility for that dynamic, not realizing it's the combination of me, that person, and the situation together. Every single time we interact with something, we create an energy dynamic. Whatever we are feeling, whatever our intent is, comes in. Whatever they are feeling and their intent comes in. And then there's just unique back and forth that starts to come. And so we have to look at if we are creating unique back and forths that don't really lead to greater openings for business. They don't lead to a creative environment. They don't lead to you feeling like you have a foundation and you also have a voice in the situation. Then those dynamics aren't ideal. But we need to start building awareness on why that is, and more importantly, what do we do about it when it comes up? Because being resilient in business, being resilient in your own mental, emotional wealth and well-being takes this skill. Because you're going to run into people left, right, and center who don't create a beautiful open dynamic with you. We need to know how to reverse that or to exit gracefully, we'll call it. So today I want to go over 3 things you need to know and 3 things you need to do with this. So we're going to take a little bit of a more direct format with this. So number 1, first thing to know is energy is at the foundation of everything. Again, take the woo-woo out of it and really look practically. Beneath everything in the world is energy. I like to call it the unseen part of life, right? We know the stressors of seen. We know the stressors when our bank account is low and we have a bill. We know the stressors of having an upset with a friend because we got into a verbal argument. We know about the overt and kind of things you could touch or pinpoint and look at and say, that's why I'm stressed. Underneath all that is the unseen. It's the energy beneath everything. And sometimes we don't realize why we walk into a room and we start to feel closed off or shy, like we can't speak and we don't have a voice. It's an energy dynamic. Sometimes we don't realize when everything looks perfectly fine and we wake up and we're, wait a second, something just feels off and I don't know what it is. It's like generalized anxiety where we don't know what the trigger is. We just know that it's there because we have this sensation. Having this understanding that beneath everything, there is a flow of energy is going to give you a lot of freedom because it's going to let you see things clearer and see things that a lot of other people aren't paying attention to. I know that when I walk into a situation with somebody, my energy speaks first. How I'm feeling in that moment. Everything I'm carrying forward into that conversation that I'm not saying, still there and it's still palpable. So what do I do before I go in? I have to acknowledge where I am in the moment to then move forward. You hope to run into a partner who is clean and clear as well. Doesn't happen all the time or hardly any of the time, quite frankly. So being aware that underneath all of this, if it's not being said, but you still feel it, that's the foundational energy of the dynamic there. That's a big thing to know. It may not be overt. You may not be able to point at it. You may not be able to speak to it or have the other person. But just because it's not overt doesn't make it not real. So allow yourself just to know that that's going on in the situation. Number 2, we all have very unique perceptions of energy. And sometimes they have nothing to do with what's actually happening in that moment. Right? So if we've already acknowledged number 1 thing to know is that energy is at the foundation, but number 2, we have to add on to this awareness that everyone has a different perception. Your perception of the situation and how you feel may be totally opposite to the other person and how they feel and how they're perceiving it. A lot of it too, what we do, like I said before, you're coming into that energy dynamic with a certain amount of expectations or things that are going on in your life. So is the other person. We're not speaking to that, but it's felt, it's palpable, and it's there. But we're going to have a unique perception to that. And we also have unique triggers to it as well. Being able to acknowledge that this is happening at the foundation of all your interactions, but also being aware too that it may not actually match what's really going on, gives you a lot of power because it lets you take a beat and know what you came into the conversation with. And also to start to not doubt yourself, but to take a second to question if you're responding adequately. If you're actually speaking to what is, or you're speaking to either your expectation or what you brought in, or the other person is as well. So that's really important to know. Our perception of that energy is unique to us. It may not match the other person, and it may have nothing to do with what's actually going on, right? Third thing to know, the energy can be changed. A lot of times we think that when we have a certain dynamic with a person, we have someone who bought a product and we have to deal with them and oh my goodness, they're the biggest pain in the butt. Or you hire somebody and it's just not working out and there's just this tension between you. We buy those dynamics as being permanent, like it's just the way I am with that person and nothing can be done. It's actually not true. Energy, like everything else, is malleable. There are ways to work around it. There are ways to actually say it's foundational, it's not being spoken to. Number two, it's my unique perception and they have their own point of view as well. May also not match what's actually happening. There may be some other stuff coming in, right? And then having this third thing in your bank that, look, it can be changed. We just have to get really clear about what we brought to the table and where it's a mismatch. Having somebody else being okay with this conversation makes it easier, but it also isn't required. If you get clear on what you came into the energy of that dynamic with, and you take responsibility and accountability for it, it can be changed and improved. Yes, verbal conversations are needed, but a lot of times just a shift at that level is also enough to relieve it. So those are 3 things to know. Now we have to talk about what we do with it. So 3 things to do. One of my favorites is to acknowledge, observe, and develop. I love it. What am I going to do when I go into a situation and things are funky? I can't put my finger on it, but there's just a vibe. I'm not feeling it. Number 1, I'm going to acknowledge the fact that something just feels off. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to make it wrong. I'm not going to try to fix it right away. I'm just going to go, something's funky. I'm going to move into observing it. I love in yoga when they talk about being the observer and just taking one step back from the situation. I do this by leaning back in my chair. I do this by taking a breath so that I don't react and respond right away. Anything you can do just to feel a sense of stepping back to observe. Let the other person talk for a little bit. Let the group dynamic play out if there's multiple people. You already know something's off. Why don't you just observe for a little bit? Number 3, go ahead and develop some awareness around it. Now that I've observed, what am I aware of here? Can I pinpoint an energy dynamic coming from somebody else? And is there a way for me to shift and change it? Is it something that I'm bringing to the situation where maybe some of my triggers got brought up that I can go, okay, cool. This actually doesn't match the situation. This person's tone of voice reminds me of this other person that I don't get along with, and I'm reacting. Cool. Well, now I have some power. I have awareness and clarity. I can start to change it. These 3 things, if you're in an interaction, business or otherwise, and you start to notice things are off, these 3 things of not acknowledge it, start to observe it for a little bit, and then develop your awareness, it's going to give you more power because you're going to be able to actually do something about the energy. Remember, it's foundational. We have a unique perception of it, but it can be changed if you're able to grab onto this awareness key. Number 2, second thing to do, buffers. I've been in a lot of systems that talk about relationships, interpersonal communication, energy dynamics, all the things, right? It's interesting to me how some of them really, really are interested in barriers like boundaries, don't cross it. And how other ones are like, it's totally inappropriate to ever have a boundary. You need to be totally open to other people. And I have played dynamically with both of those. Personally, I feel like the barrier is a constriction to the flow of energy and to connection. So I don't like the hard boundaries unless I absolutely have to for safety and for my own health and well-being. I'm also not super in love with this whole no boundary, no barrier whatsoever. Like everything is just open and you can take whatever you want. And I can, this whole open channel. I feel like I've been in so many different situations, hot situations with my business, being in publicity where there are people looking at me. There's just different things in different avenues that you go down. Also working in the hospital like I did for years too, there wasn't a whole bunch that you really wanted when someone got angry to come in. So instead of looking at a hard boundary or no boundary, if you started to look at a buffer, would that be something that would be more dynamic for you? For me, I really love that word because it's like, I don't need to keep you out, but I don't also need to let you all the way in. There can be a permeable, malleable buffer where that I can, again, have a navigation system as I'm dealing with people to see what I would like to let into my space and what I would not. And when an energy is funky and a little bit off and I'm in observer mode, I want to have that buffer because I want enough information to come in, but I don't want so much that I get overwhelmed, right? Third thing to know, you want to actually start looking at who fills your cup and creating more positive environments. I heard an amazing quote from Lee Harris. He's a channeler, someone I follow a lot on social media. He's a beautiful, beautiful being. And he was talking about a quote, someone really wanting to change the energy in the room. They're in a room, it's a funky dynamic, they've acknowledged it, they're doing all this stuff, right? He was talking about this thing where we go so much into thinking that we have to fix it or heal it or change it or make it better. People pleasers of the world, caregivers, service-based practitioners, you know this really well. And I loved what he said because he said, your safety is not reliant on you fixing or changing the energy. It is you asking the question whether or not that's the room you want to be in. And I loved that because so often I feel a personal responsibility or the need or the ability to change everything to go a certain way. That I should be able to lead the workshop a certain way when I'm with a group of people, when I'm delivering a product, being able to lead that dynamic. In any situation you can think of where maybe you're taking a little bit too much responsibility for what's at play. And to know that I have a choice. And one of those choices is to leave, is to end the relationship, is to actually say, us working together is not a good idea. Being able to have that freedom, that your safety does not depend on you changing the energy dynamic, but also, or more importantly, you knowing that you can leave that dynamic at any time. And maybe that's going to be the safest and healthiest choice for you. And I know I talk a lot about foundational stuff, safety and security. And I feel like I bring that up because entrepreneurs in general, what draws us to it is freedom and creativity, and we can do our own thing. But what do? We kind of let our butt fly in the breeze a bit when that happens, right? There is a need to actually build up this foundation and to feel safe, to feel secure, and to have that resilient backbone and springboard before we can really have our creativity. So these things I would love for you to play with. I know that was a lot of information for a short episode. This is just one of the things I talk about in the chapter in my free ebook. So I go ahead and download that. Again, the link is down below for you to get your free copy. And we're going to continue to dive into this on this series. There is definitely more to it, looking at mental health as the journey, entrepreneurship as a journey, bringing us into dynamic caregiving for ourselves. but then also really looking at the energies and that underplay that we all go through. What's really going on and what can we do about that? Our next episode is going to get into mind-body connection and why that is important when you're building your business, bringing your body along for the ride, not just your intellect. It's a huge conversation. And the success I've had in endeavors where I've done that and actually created it in tune with how my body felt were night and day different than when I just let my mind lead. So I'm excited to have that conversation with you. That is coming up next week. Have an amazing week. And as always, I will chat with you soon.